Earth warned the galaxy we were holding back. Now it's war without mercy. The archives of the inner spiral carried a peculiar gap where a civilization should have been. Not a missing page, but a careful absence. Titles referenced treaties footnoted, star maps showing old shipping lanes that ended at coordinates marked only with blank ink. Every scholar who noticed the omission reached the same early conclusion: extinction, assimilation, irrelevance. The council's clerks filed the anomaly under administrative decay, the way a body files a scar under skin. In the outer rings, dock workers told a different story in quiet shifts between Dago scans. They spoke of a species that learned to survive by refusing to be seen, not noble, not heroic, merely patient. The kind of patience formed by centuries of being measured, judged, and underestimated. No official record explained why the silence had been maintained. No decree named the reason. Only a pattern remained. Whenever a new empire rose and began cataloging lesser worlds, the same coordinates were quietly removed from the index again. Always by someone with authority, always without comment. It was not fear that maintained the gap. It was caution. The first sign that caution was failing arrived as routine paperwork. A minor relay station in the Lysa corridor reported a malfunction. Incoming transmissions repeating in perfect cadence, without corruption, without drift, as if the signal had been anchored to a fixed idea rather than a physical source. Technicians replaced boards, recalibrated lenses, and blamed solar noise. The problem persisted. The message did not demand attention. It did not threaten. It did not even identify its origin. It simply stated that a border had been crossed, and that the crossing had been noted. On the council floor, the report lasted less than a minute. The presiding marshal, old enough to remember the final skirmishes of the Dominion era, dismissed it as an automated distress loop from a collapsed mining consortium. A clerk appended the word "resolved" for the sake of internal audit. In the days that followed, adjacent relays began reporting the same cadence. Then a deep space observatory in the Selvan Reach recorded a new kind of quiet, a corridor of stars dimmed by fractional degrees, not disappearing, not exploding, but shifting, subtle, consistent and patterned like a careful hand adjusting a curtain. The council called it an astrophysical curiosity. Observers called it interference. Traders called it a bad week. The older species, those with long memories and longer lifespans, did not call it anything at all. They simply stopped shipping through the corridor. When asked why, they cited insurance premiums, supply cycles, and labor shortages. None of those explanations matched the way their vessels re-rated, as if avoiding a grave. The external threat arrived in the form most empires preferred: far away and explained by someone else. A cluster polity known as the Vanteri Compact, efficient, expansionist, and chronically confident, announced that the Council's boundary protocols had become obsolete. Its admirals spoke in warm terms about stabilizing trade routes and preventing piracy. Its economists published elegant forecasts. Its diplomats smiled through every sentence, as if violence were merely a tool that could be polished into civility. The Compact did not declare war. It declared a necessity. Its fleets moved toward the border systems in smooth, measured arc. There were no grand battles, only escalations presented as facts. A customs platform vanished. A listening buoy went silent. A neutral freighter failed to return, and was later found drifting, intact, its crew alive but unable to explain why the ship had stopped obeying its own navigation commands. The council argued, as councils often did. Some demanded a show of force to preserve credibility. Some urged negotiation to protect commerce. Some insisted the Compact would stop once confronted with unified policy. Unification came slowly, and the Compact moved quick. On the outer world of Remate, where council inspectors oversaw peacekeeping contracts, a Compact delegation arrived to audit. They brought gifts, rare alloys, medical reserves, portable. They also brought a revised governance framework, already printed, already signed, with blank spaces left for local leaders to accept. Remate's governor refused. Within an hour, the governor's comms locked. The public power grid entered an emergency conservation cycle, and the planet's orbital elevators halted mid-ascent as if the sky itself had decided to hold its breath. The compact called it a safety measure. The council called it a hostage event. The compact called for calm. The council called for a task force. It was then that the older species finally spoke, not in council chambers but in private channels between heads of intelligence and archivists, who kept their own records outside the official library. A message circulated among those who still remembered the old omissions. The message contained 3 items: a set of coordinates, a date range, and a single sentence. The sentence did not name a species, it did not name a weapon, it did not name a plan. It stated only that silence was not absence, and that patience was not weakness. At first, the council treated the coordinates as a refuge point, a place to hide assets and civilians if the compact pressed deep. The first ships dispatched were humanitarian, medical barges, evacuation cruisers, archive transports. Their captains expected a backwater, a forgotten rock, a world that had survived by being unimportant. Instead, the ships arrived at a region where space itself seemed arranged with intent. Sensor ghosts appeared and vanished without leaving trails. Navigation marks responded to queries with answers that did not fit any standard protocol yet still made sense, as if someone had translated clarity into machine logic. The starfield around the coordinates was dense, but not chaotic. It carried the faint geometry of engineered traffic lanes, paths that had been used for a very long time, then abandoned, then preserved like an old road kept clear for reasons no one wished to explain. The first captain to cross the threshold, a cautious Ansali named Threx, recorded a private log that never reached official channels. The log described the sensation of entering a space that did not want attention, not hostile, not welcoming, simply uninterested. Threx's vessel found a marker in open void, a structure small as an escape pod, black as unlit metal, with no emblem and no broadcast. It did not approach, it did not intercept, it allowed itself to be found like a When Threx's ship hailed it, the marker replied with a single data packet, a star map, a set of safe vectors, and a warning rendered in 15 languages. The warning did not mention war. It stated that certain actions could not be undone, and that the consequences of those actions were not negotiable. On Ramate, the compact tightened control, its admirals continued smiling, its auditors continued printing form. The council's task force assembled too late to prevent the next audit, and too early to accept the new reality without denial. A council observer was assigned to the task force to provide neutral assessment. The observer was not a soldier, not a diplomat, an analyst named Kes Lorian, trained in institutional psychology, whose career had been built on predicting when societies fractured under pressure. Kes did not believe in myths. Myths, in Kes's experience, were patterns mistaken for destiny. Kes also did not believe in missing archives. Missing archives in Kes's experience were decisions. The task force's flagship reached the coordinate region under a mandate of investigation. It carried representatives from 5 member species, each with their own assumptions and appetite. The commander, Admiral Sova Marine, carried certainty like armor. The compact, Sova insisted, would stop once confronted with adequate force. The council would reassert control, trade would recover, the law would be restored. Kes listened without interrupting. Certainty, Kes understood, was often a coping mechanism. The flagship crossed into the quiet region, and immediately lost several standard telemetry channels, not disabled, not jammed, merely rerouted, as if the region refused to allow certain kinds of noise. The ship's AI did not panic. It reported an unexpected system state. External traffic governance detected. Admiral Sova demanded an explanation. The AI offered none. It did not have a category for what it was encountering. A new signal arrived, again in perfect cadence, again without flourish, again without identification. This time, the message addressed the Council Task Force by name. It acknowledged the presence of observers. It acknowledged the mandate of investigation. It acknowledged the Compact's recent actions in the border system. Then it stated something the Council had not heard in centuries. A witness had been assigned. The task force expected contact in the form of a vessel, a delegation, an ambassador. It expected the usual theater of power, a ship arriving with banners, a diplomatic language of greetings, a calculated display designed to establish hierarchy. Contact arrived instead as a file. The file contained audited records of the compact's audits across 12 systems, not rumors, not narratives, but technical logs, power grid locks, elevator halts, comm seizures, financial coercion, forced resignations. The data was clean, cross-referenced, and time-stamped with precision. Alongside the logs were brief notes. The notes were not political. They were not angry. They read like a patient technician, describing a malfunction and its probable outcome if left uncorrected. Kess read the notes and felt something unfamiliar, not fear, but embarrassment. The council had been arguing about what the compact intended, while someone else had been recording what the compact already did. A second packet followed. A request for a single action. The request was not a demand for alliance, not a plea for help, not a threat. It asked the council task force to stop calling the event on Ramate an audit. It asked the council to name the action what it was: coercive occupation. Admiral Sova resisted. Language, Sova insisted, was negotiable. The compact would interpret such naming as provocation. Kess observed quietly that the compact had interpreted every restraint as permission. The task force sent a message back, carefully worded, formally neutral, and inevitably slow. It thanked the unknown source for data. It requested identification. It requested negotiation. It requested terms. The reply arrived almost immediately. Identification was not offered. Terms were not offered. Only a statement. Negotiation required good faith, and good faith required a history of restraint. The compact's response to restraint had already been recorded. Therefore, negotiation was currently irrelevant. The council's flagship attempted to trace the signal. The trace returned a map of possibilities rather than an origin point, a corridor of potential sources, each equally plausible, each equally wrong. The ship's sensors began to report something else. Small anomalies moving in the dark between the stars, never approaching, never retreating, simply maintaining presence. Kess watched the tactical feed. The anomalies formed no obvious pattern, yet the ship's AI grew quieter, as if trying not to disturb a sleeping thing. The task force debated its next steps. Some urged withdrawal. The unknown region was clearly hazardous. Some urged escalation. Hazard was proof of hidden military strength. Kess urged a different question. Why had this region been kept quiet for so long? The answer arrived in a third packet, smaller than the first two. It carried no logs, no notes, no requests. It carried a historical excerpt from an erased archive. It described a time when the council had been younger, when it had faced a crisis that threatened its legitimacy. The excerpt named no enemies. It simply described a choice made by the council to stabilize the spiral by allowing a compact of empires to enforce order in the border system. Order had been maintained. Commerce had prospered. The council had grown comfortable. The excerpt then described the cost: worlds left unattended, grievances filed and ignored, pleas routed through bureaucracies until they dissolved into procedure. The excerpt ended with a single line: silence was a policy, not an accident. Kess read it twice. Admiral Sova dismissed it as propaganda. Kess did not argue. Propaganda attempted to persuade. This excerpt did not persuade. It indicted. On Ramate, the compact began relocating key industrial staff for safety. Families were separated, not violently, but efficiently, assigned to different housing sectors, based on labor needs. It was the kind of cruelty that could be defended as logistic. The council task force received a request from Ramate's governor, transmitted through a hidden channel that flickered between carrier waves like a plea searching for a gap in surveillance. The governor did not request war. The governor requested only the return of autonomy and the release of detained administrators. The task force drafted another message, this time to the compact: formal protest, legal citation, threat of sanction. The compact replied politely, thanked the council for its concern, and announced that Ramate had voluntarily accepted a new governance framework. Admiral Sova ordered the task force to accelerate toward Ramate. The unknown region did not block the departure. It did not slow the ship. It merely sent one final packet. This packet contained a revised star map, safe vectors, that bypassed the compact's sensor net, corridors that should not have existed. routes that moved of gravitational fields as if the terrain had been studied by someone who had lived in it for a long time. Admiral Sova accepted the map while insisting it was unnecessary. Kes accepted it in silence and began to understand the nature of the witness. Not a savior, not an ally, but an entity that had been watching the spiral with the patience of geology. The task force arrived near Ramate in a state of controlled urgency. Compact vessels hung in orbit in clean formation. They did not fire, they did not threaten. Their presence itself was the statement compliance had been engineered, and resistance would be treated as disorder. Council ships announced their arrival with standard protocols and demanded access to Ramate's administrative platforms. The compact refused, citing ongoing safety procedures. The council ships prepared to deploy boarding teams. Then the quiet happened again. Not the quiet of silent comms, but the quiet of a decision made elsewhere. Compact vessels began reporting internal inconsistencies, power nodes cycling without command, navigation thrusters responding with fractional delays, weapon systems entering diagnostic loop. The compact's commander demanded explanations from the ships. The ships returned normal status reports, even as their behavior deviated from those reports. The compact commander accused the council of sabotage. The council denied involvement. Kes watched the system's feed and recognized a pattern similar to the old relay cadence, a perfectly timed interference, not meant to destroy, but to unbalance confidence. A compact frigate attempted to fire a warning pulse toward the council task force. The weapon did not fire. It returned a maintenance code, indicating misalignment. The frigate's crew attempted manual override. The override sequence completed, but the weapon remained inert. A second frigate attempted to reposition to block the council's approach. Its thrusters fired, then corrected, then fired again, as if a careful hand were preventing it from taking the exact vector it intended. Admiral Sova interpreted the malfunction as advantage and ordered a rapid approach. Kes did not share Sova's satisfaction. A system capable of bending a fleet's behavior without visible force was not a tool that cared about sides, it cared about outcomes. A message arrived, not on open channels, but in Kes's private analyst console, a place only council security should have been able to access. The message contained no threats, it contained a question. It asked whether the council intended to restore autonomy or merely replace one occupation with another. Kes stared at the question for a long time. Questions, Kes knew, were rarely asked by those without power. Kes answered carefully. The council intended to restore autonomy. A reply arrived immediately. Then a witness would observe the council's behavior as closely as it had observed the compacts. The boarding operation proceeded. Council teams docked with compact platforms. They encountered no gunfire, only locked doors, automated defense systems, cycling into safe modes, and crews ordered by compact command to avoid escalation. In the heart of the platform, council officers found administrative chambers where Ramate's elected staff sat under surveillance, not physically harmed, but systematically stripped of authority. Forms had been signed under voluntary compliance. Cameras recorded every breath. The compact had created legality through exhaustion. The council teams released detainees and reopened power nodes. They broadcast the restoration of governance. The compact's commander protested on legal grounds and demanded immediate atritment. The council refused. The compact did not fire. Instead, it initiated a new tactic. It announced that several outer systems would be blockaded until the council returned the platform. The council hesitated. Kes watched the council's internal channels fill with political language, risk management, economic exposure, public confidence. The council had rescued Ramate, but now it was being offered a familiar bargain. Sacrifice the few to stabilize the many. A new packet arrived from the silent region, not to the council as an institution, but to the task force's senior officers, each message personalized, each file containing a brief record of the officers' past decisions, votes on sanctions, recommendations to delay intervention, memos suggesting strategic silence as a tool to preserve stability. The packet did not accuse, it merely placed history in the room. Admiral Sova called it blackmail. Kes called it accountability. The older species on the task force, the ones whose lifespans had stretched across the eras, did not speak. Their silence was heavier than argument. The compact's blockade began. A trade artery tightened. Food shipments slowed. Medical convoys were delayed. The Council's member worlds complained loudly, as member worlds always did when discomfort touched their own ports. The Council leadership demanded the task force retreat to prevent collapse of commerce. Admiral Silva considered obedient. Admiral Silva also considered the eyes of history, suddenly present and watching. Kess spoke in the quiet. Kess did not speak of honor. Kess did not speak of pride. Kess spoke of the practical outcome of surrendering again. The compact would learn that coercion worked, and other powers would learn the same lesson. Kess also spoke of the unknown witness, a force that had been quiet until now, not because it lacked strength, but because it had been measuring what the spiral deserved. The decision that followed was not heroic, it was reluctant. The task force remained. The Council leadership, under pressure from internal dissent, issued a partial authorization, defensive posture only, no escalation, no pursuit. The compact adjusted. If the Council would not pursue, the compact would expand elsewhere. Its fleets shifted toward the Keran Belt, a cluster of resource worlds protected by outdated defense grids. The Council task force received distress calls from Keran administrators, requests for patrols, requests for escorts, requests for help that sounded too familiar. The Council leadership stalled. The unknown witness sent no further packets, it simply watched. Then on a routine scan, the task force detected something approaching from the quiet region, not a fleet, not an armada, but a single object moving on an old vector, so old that the navigation charts marked it as obsolete. The object did not cloak, it did not broadcast, it traveled openly as if concealment were unnecessary. Admiral Silva ordered caution protocols, weapon systems warned, boarding teams assembled. Kess watched the object's profile emerge on the screen and felt a strange ease. The shape was not elegant, not intimidating through size, but purposeful. It resembled industrial craft more than warship, built to endure rather than impress. As it approached, the object transmitted its first identification in Council standard. The identification was not a name, it was a classification, Terran Relay Vessel. The word Terran stirred the room, not because it was famous, but because it was absent. It was the kind of word that should have come with footnotes, and instead came with blank ink. Admiral Silva demanded an explanation. The Terran vessel requested docking permission. The request included an assurance. No boarding would be required, no weapons would be displayed, no ceremonial contact would be attempted. Admiral Silva refused at first, then reconsidered when the Terran vessel began matching the task force's maneuvering with perfect coordination, as if it had already predicted every defensive adjustment. Permission was granted. A docking port opened. No delegation marched across the threshold. No armored soldiers. No ambassadors with silver collars. A single figure arrived, human in shape, wearing simple attire with no insignia. The figure walked with a measured pace, and carried a small case. Security scanners registered nothing dangerous. No weapons, no concealed devices, no biological anomalies. The figure introduced itself by function, not title. Archive custodian. The human did not apologize for absence from the archives. The human did not demand recognition. The human simply observed that the compact's behavior had crossed a line. Admiral Silva demanded to know why the Terrans had remained quiet while the spiral fractured. The custodian answered without emotion. The spiral had been observed for a long time, and the spiral had often preferred silence. The custodian also stated that intervention was not offered as charity. Intervention was offered as consequence. Kess watched the room's reaction, and noted the discomfort. Empires could accept help if it came with gratitude, debt, or subordination. Help offered as consequence required a different posture. It required humility. Admiral Silva asked what the Terrans wanted. The custodian opened the case, and placed a device on the table. It was small, unremarkable, and yet it altered the room's systems immediately, not by force, but by permission. The device somehow already possessed. The task force's main tactical display shifted to show the Keran belt. On the display, compact fleets moved toward the resource worlds. The custodian spoke evenly. The Terrans intended to prevent the compact from turning governance into a commodity. Admiral Silva asked how.
The custodian did not describe weapons. The custodian described logistics. Terran interference would not destroy compact ships. It would deny them reliable control. It would make coercion expensive. It would slow expansion, until internal politics inside the compact demanded restraint. Admiral Salva called it sabotage. The custodian called it rebalancing. Kess asked the question that mattered. Why? The custodian's eyes did not change, but something in the tone shifted, as if the question had been expected. The custodian stated that the spiral had reached a familiar junction, comfort versus accountability. The spiral had chosen comfort many times. The spiral had been offered another chance, and this time, a witness had observed a different choice. Imperfect, reluctant, but real. Therefore the Terrans had decided the spiral was still salvageable. The custodian did not claim moral superiority. The custodian did not celebrate. The custodian simply named a threshold. Crossed. Silence had begun to break. Admiral Salva demanded proof that the Terrans were not seeking to replace the compact as the spiral's hidden enforcer. The custodian offered a simple constraint. Terran intervention would be limited by transparency. Every action would be logged and made available to the Council. Every interference would be recorded and open to audit. Kess noticed the precise inversion. The compact had hidden coercion under legality. The Terrans proposed to constrain power through exposure. Admiral Salva agreed to a limited demonstration. The Terran relay vessel departed the flagship and moved toward the Keran belt, still alone, still unhurried. The Council task force followed at a distance. As the Terran vessel approached the compact fleet, it transmitted a message on open channels, audible to every ship and every listening buoy. The message did not threaten annihilation. It did not demand surrender. It stated only that the compact's occupation protocols had been recorded, and that further application would trigger systemic denial measures. The compact commander laughed publicly. The laughter was not cruel, it was comfort. The compact's culture had been built on the assumption that hidden coercion would never be challenged by anything more than speeches. The compact fleet moved forward anyway. The Terran vessel did not fire. Instead, the compact's ships began to lose coherence of coordination. Formation spacing drifted by small degrees. Communication lags introduced tiny misunderstandings. Targeting systems calculated solutions that were technically correct but tactically irrelevant. Engines produced thrust, then corrected, then produced again, as if the ships were being forced to reconsider each decision. The compact commander demanded countermeasures and ordered aggressive scanning. The scans returned nothing hostile. That was the worst part. Nothing to shoot, nothing to blame except the loss of control. Within an hour, the compact fleet's advance had slowed to a crawl, not because the ships were destroyed, but because every step forward required disproportionate effort. Coercion, suddenly, had friction. The Keran worlds received an unexpected gift: time. The Council task force watched the compact fleet withdraw, not in panic, but in recalculation. The compact had not been defeated, it had been denied efficiency, and for a system built on efficient coercion, inefficiency was a form of injury. On the Council flagship, officers argued over what they had witnessed. Some called it brilliance, some called it escalation, some called it the beginning of Terran domination under a different mark. Kess listened, then asked the custodian what the Terrans had been doing while erased from the archives. The custodian answered in quiet terms: rebuilding resilience in private, not fleets, not monuments, systems of survival.
The custodian described abandoned habitats kept functional for centuries, food cycles that could withstand trade collapse, data archives stored in physical media immune to network sabotage, civic protocols designed to prevent governance from being seized by paperwork. It was the language of endurance, not conquest. The Council's younger species struggled to understand. Their politics ran on visibility. The Terrans spoke as if visibility were a liability. The custodian also stated that the Terrans had learned a lesson during earlier eras. Once a power was seen as a protector, it would be asked to solve every crisis, and every crisis solved would create dependence. Dependence would become resentment. resentment would become war. Therefore, the Terrans had avoided becoming the spiral's caretaker, until the spiral began refusing silence. The compact, denied quick victories, turned to narrative. Its diplomats flooded channels with claims that the Council had partnered with an unknown force to sabotage lawful governance. The compact framed the Terrans as terrorists. It framed the Council as compromised. It promised to liberate border worlds from the Council's decaying bureaucracy. The compact's propaganda spread because it contained enough truth to be believed. The Council was decaying and the Terrans were unknown. The Council leadership panicked. Member worlds demanded clarity. Who were the Terrans and why were they acting in Council space? The Council requested the Custodian present identification on the Council floor. The Custodian agreed and traveled with the task force to the inner spiral. During the journey, Kez observed the Terran vessel more closely. It carried no luxury, no banners, no dramatic architecture. Its crew, quiet humans moving in efficient routines, treated the ship as an instrument, not a home. They spoke rarely. When they spoke, they referenced contingencies, redundancies, and patience. No one celebrated the compact's withdrawal. No one spoke of victory. This was not triumph, it was maintenance. On arrival at the Council's capital station, the Custodian walked into a chamber filled with the spiral's performing confidence. Delegates sat beneath carved emblems. Security drones hovered with visible purpose. Recorders captured every breath. The Custodian did not back. The Custodian did not glare. The Custodian placed a small archive key on the Council floor and requested the opening of a sealed index. The Council's archivists protested. Such indexes were classified, restricted by ancient protocol. The Custodian stated a simple fact. The protocol had been used to erase worlds from record, and the time for that practice had ended. A debate followed. It was political, it was loud, it was familiar. Then, unexpectedly, one of the oldest delegates, an Ilvari elder whose age was measured in millennia, stood and spoke a single sentence. Opening required. The chamber fell quiet. The elder's authority was not official. It was historical. The Ilvari had been present when the first erasures occurred. The sealed index was opened. The name Terra appeared in the system registry, like a recovered bone, old, unadorned, and undeniably real. The index contained treaties. It contained trade routes. It contained council votes on border enforcement. It contained internal memos recommending silence as a strategy. The evidence did not flatter the council. The Custodian requested permission to publish the index to all member worlds. The council leadership resisted. Exposure would destabilize trust. Trust, they insisted, was the foundation of civilization. The Custodian replied calmly, trust built on omission was already fractured. Only visibility could prevent the compact's methods from becoming the spiral's norm. Kez watched the delegates shift. Many feared the compact. Many feared Terran interference. Few had considered that the council itself was the original architect of silence. Publication was approved, narrowly. Across the spiral, populations received the index and reacted with a confusion that quickly turned to anger. Not anger at the Terrans, anger at the council's long practice of deciding which worlds mattered enough to be recorded. Protests erupted, not violent, but persistent. Demands for inquiry, demands for accountability. The compact attempted to exploit the unrest, offering itself as a cleaner alternative to the council's old corruption. The Terran Custodian, invited to speak again, did not argue ideology. The Custodian simply released the compact's occupation logs, audited and verified, across public networks. The compact's narrative collapsed under its own contradiction. Lawful governance did not require comms, seizures, and forced resignations. The compact did not retreat, it adapted. If coercion by fleet had friction, coercion by finance could still work. Compact agents began buying debt in border systems, acquiring infrastructure through legal instruments, turning worlds into subsidiaries rather than colonies. No blockade required, no fleet needed, only contracts. The council, slow and procedural, struggled to respond. The Terrans responded differently. The custodian presented the council a tool, an open audit framework, that could detect coercive financial patterns in real time and publish them publicly. The framework was not a weapon, it was exposure. The council hesitated. Exposure would also reveal council corruption, old and new. Some delegates argued against it, some argued for it. The younger species called it radical, the older species called it overdue. Kez observed that the Terrans were not offering domination. The Terrans were offering a system that would make domination harder for everyone, including Terra. The framework was approved. Within weeks, compact financial operations faced a new obstacle: daylight. Worlds saw who was buying their debt, which officials were being bribed, which shipping guilds were being leveraged. Populations began rejecting contracts, not because the compact could not force compliance, but because forcing compliance in public produced unrest that threatened the compact's own stability. The compact's admirals demanded permission to end the problem decisively. Compact leadership refused. The compact's foundation was control through appearing reasonable. Open violence would fracture that image and unify opposition. A stalemate emerged: economic, political, and psychological rather than militaristic. In that stalemate, the spiral experienced something unfamiliar: space to think. The council began reforming in small, reluctant ways. Committees were dismantled, oversight was strengthened. Delegates who had built careers on silence found themselves facing public scrutiny. The Terrans remained quiet. The relay vessel returned to the border corridors, observing and logging. Terran interference remained limited and documented. Kez remained with the task force, now transformed into an oversight body rather than a warship formation. The role was uncomfortable. It required naming actions honestly, resisting the temptation of easy narratives, and accepting that stability could not be purchased by sacrificing the unseen. One evening in the council capital station, Kez found the custodian in the archive hall, alone, examining a wall of restored records. The custodian's posture conveyed neither pride nor regret. The custodian looked like someone checking the structural integrity of a building after a long storm. Kez asked what Terra wanted in the end. The custodian replied with a question: what did the spiral want? Kez did not answer quickly. The spiral had always wanted comfort, legitimacy, and commerce without cost. The spiral now faced the cost: accountability and the loss of plausible deniability. Kez answered: eventually. A spiral that could no longer hide cruelty behind procedure. The custodian nodded slightly, as if acknowledging a baseline requirement. Terra, the custodian stated, did not seek to rule the spiral. Terra sought to remove the spiral's ability to pretend. Pretending was the soil in which occupation grew. The compact, denied pretense, began fracturing internally. Its trade guilds demanded stability. Its border governors demanded autonomy. Its citizens questioned why expansion had become expensive. Compact leadership attempted to blame Terra. That narrative held for a time, until compact citizens saw the occupation logs and the financial coercion audits. The compact's own silence became visible. Reform movements rose within the compact, slow, contested, imperfect. Some demanded withdrawal from border systems and a return to domestic investment. Others demanded a purge of the old admirals. Others demanded stronger control to suppress dissent. The compact entered a phase Kez had predicted for many societies: pressure revealing scene. The council, given time, strengthened its border protocols and reorganized peacekeeping under transparent oversight. It was not noble, it was survival. The council understood that failure would invite replacement, not by Terra, but by the next compact that learned coercion. Terra's presence became a kind of quiet gravity, not seen in banners, but felt in the way empires recalculated risk. In the years that followed, the spiral changed less through battles and more through documents, published audits, recorded votes, legal frameworks, rewritten to prevent silence from being used as a policy. Some called it the era of exposure. Some called it Terran manipulation. Kez called it a correction. The erased coordinates were restored to charts. Trade resumed through the quiet corridor, now patrolled not by Terran fleets, but by a joint oversight network designed to prevent any single power from seizing the Council's archives carried a new clause. No index could be sealed without public review. No world could be erased by committee. The compact withdrew from Romet under a negotiated framework that acknowledged wrongdoing without admitting moral collapse. The compact retained pride, as empires often did, but its reach became more cautious. Terra withdrew as well, in the way Terra seemed to prefer, by reducing presence rather than declaring departure. The relay vessel returned to the quiet region. The custodian left behind only the audit framework and an open archive key, accessible to any world willing to publish what it found. Kez visited Romet years later. The orbital elevators moved again. The administrative staff worked in plain offices rather than surveillance chambers. The governor, a successor now, older and more tired, spoke of rebuilding with a voice that carried less faith in distant institutions and more faith in local resilience. On a memorial walkway, Romet's citizens had carved a line into stone, not a heroic phrase, not a vow of vengeance, simple acknowledgement. Silence enabled occupation. The line was not directed at the compact alone, it was directed at everyone who had once benefited from quiet. Kez stood before the stone and felt the weight of a new kind of fear in the spiral. Not fear of Terran weapons, but fear of being seen clearly. The spiral had learned that patience could be a force. Terra had not conquered. Terra had not demanded tribute. Terra had not built monuments in foreign skies. Terra had done something more unsettling. It had refused to let the spiral hide its own choices. In the council chambers, debates continued, as debates always would. Power still tempted. Comfort still seduced. Empires still searched for elegant ways to make coercion look like governance. But every time a delegate suggested silence as a stabilizing strategy, the archive key on the council floor, kept there as a reminder, glinted under the chamber lights, small and unremarkable, impossible to ignore. Far from the council, in the quiet corridor where stars had once dimmed by fractional degrees, the old relay cadence continued, not as a warning, but as a record, a witness, assigned long ago still observed. And in the spiral's vast machinery of ambition and denial, that observation became a boundary as real as any fleet. Stories like this are sometimes followed by an option to subscribe, for listeners who prefer slow-burn science fiction. In the final years of Keslorian's service, a private note was filed into the open archive, no longer sealed, no longer erasable. The note was not an accusation, it was not a sermon, it was a practical conclusion from a life spent watching systems fail and recover. Civilizations did not collapse only from war, they collapsed from the comfort of looking away. Terra had been erased because Terra had been inconvenient to the spiral's preferred story. Terra had returned not as a conqueror, but as a constraint, an insistence that consequences existed, even for those who called themselves civilized. On the day Kez retired, the relay cadence arrived one last time in Kez's console, soft and steady, no threats, no demands, no victory language, only a statement that the border had held, and that the record remained open. Kez closed the console and watched the council station rotate against the star field, busy and fragile and persistent. The spiral would continue building empires. The spiral would continue making mistakes. But the age of silence as policy had ended. That alone was enough to change the shape of the future.